The day started like any other Saturday in London, but for James Morrison, it would become the most embarrassing day of his life. The 23-year-old office worker from Bristol had travelled to London with his mates to celebrate his best friend Tom's bachelor party. None of them knew that by the end of the night, James would become an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. The group of 6 friends began their celebration at noon in a traditional pub near Leicester Square. James, wearing a blue button-down shirt and jeans, was excited about the weekend getaway from his boring desk job. He had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, saving up money and planning activities with the other guys. "Let's make this a night to remember," Tom had shouted as they raised their first round of beers. Little did they know how prophetic those words would become. As the afternoon turned into evening, the friends moved from pub to pub, each round of drinks making them louder and more carefree. They sang badly at a karaoke bar in Soho, tried to chat up tourists at a cocktail lounge in Covent Garden, and almost got kicked out of a sports bar for trying to start a conga line. By 11 p.m., the group had split up. 2 friends left to catch the last train home, while Tom and another friend went searching for a late-night kebab shop. This left James wandering through central London with his friend Mike, both of them way too drunk to make good decisions. "Mate, I'm telling you," James slurred, pointing at his phone's map with an unsteady finger. "Buckingham Palace is just down this road. We got to get a selfie with one of those guards with the funny hats." Mike, who was slightly more sober, tried to talk him out of it. "Come on, mate, it's nearly midnight. Let's just grab some food and head back to the hotel." But James wouldn't listen. The alcohol had given him what he thought was a brilliant idea. He had seen countless videos on social media of tourists posing near the Queen's Guards, and in his drunk mind, he was about to create something even better. "Just imagine how many likes we'll get," James insisted, already walking unsteadily in the direction of the palace. "Those guards never move, right? It'll be epic." Mike, realizing he couldn't convince his friend otherwise, decided to follow him to make sure he didn't get into too much trouble. As they walked through the quiet streets of Westminster, James kept watching videos on his phone of tourists interacting with the guards. Each clip made him more convinced that his plan was foolproof. The late-night air was cool, and the streets were relatively empty except for a few other tourists and late-night workers heading home. The magnificent Buckingham Palace came into view, its cream-colored facade illuminated by spotlights that made it glow against the dark sky. James's eyes lit up when he spotted the guard standing at his post, perfectly still in his traditional red uniform and tall bearskin hat. The guard looked exactly like the ones James had seen in all those social media videos, straight-backed, disciplined, and completely motionless. "Watch this," James whispered to Mike, pulling out his phone and opening the camera app. "I'm going to get the best guard video ever. None of that boring standing next to them stuff." Mike grabbed his arm, trying one last time to stop him. "James, those guards are real soldiers. They're not there for entertainment. Let's just take a normal photo from behind the barrier." But the combination of alcohol, peer pressure, even if only from himself, and the desire for social media fame had completely clouded James's judgment. He shrugged off Mike's hand and started walking toward the guard, his phone held up in front of him, recording what he thought would be an amazing viral video. As he approached the restricted area, a few other late-night tourists noticed him and took out their phones too. They could sense something was about to happen, though none of them could have predicted just how badly things were about to go wrong for the drunk man from Bristol who thought he was about to become famous. Lance Corporal Andrew Wells stood perfectly still at his post outside Buckingham Palace, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Even at midnight, his red uniform was perfectly pressed, and his bearskin cap sat exactly 2 fingers above his eyebrows, just as regulations required. His SA-80 rifle rested against his shoulder, a constant reminder of his serious duty to protect the palace. In his 3 years as a member of the Queen's Guard, Andrew had seen all kinds of tourist behavior. He watched people make funny faces, tell jokes, and try to make him laugh. Most days, he found it easy to maintain his famous stillness, but tonight would test his training like never before. The cold night air carried the distant sounds of London's nightlife. Cars honking, music from nearby pubs, and the occasional burst of laughter from late-night revelers. Andrew's shift had started at 10 p.m. and would continue until 6 a.m. He'd already been standing at his post for 2 hours, his mind focused on his duty while his body remained as still as a statue. Through his peripheral vision, which every guard learned to master during training, Andrew noticed a commotion about 50 meters away. A drunk young man in a blue shirt was stumbling toward the palace grounds, waving his phone around while his friend tried to stop him. Andrew had seen this type of situation hundreds of times before, but something felt different about this one. Just stay still and look serious, Andrew reminded himself, remembering his sergeant's words from basic training. You represent centuries of tradition. His fingers tightened slightly around his rifle as he heard the drunk man getting closer. Several other tourists had gathered nearby, their phones out and recording. Andrew could hear their whispered conversations. Is that guy really going to? Someone should stop him. This is going to end badly. The drunk man's friend made one last attempt to grab his arm. James, you're going to get arrested. But James shook him off and continued his unsteady approach toward the guard post. Andrew's training kicked in as he assessed the situation without moving his head. The drunk man was about 20 meters away now, clearly unsteady on his feet but moving with purpose. Two police officers were already moving in from their positions near the palace gates, but they were still too far away to intervene quickly if needed. Years of experience had taught Andrew to spot the difference between harmless tourist enthusiasm and potential trouble. This situation was quickly moving from one category to the other. He could smell the alcohol on the approaching man even from several feet away. James was now close enough that Andrew could hear him talking to his phone. Watch this, everyone. I'm going to get the best guard video ever. These guys think they're so tough with their fancy hats. The tourists watching from behind the barriers had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Some had stopped recording and were looking around for security, while others zoomed their cameras in closer, expecting something dramatic to happen. Andrew's mind raced through his training protocols. First warning at 2 meters. Stamp foot and turn at 1 meter. Raise rifle if the subject attempts physical contact. He practiced these moves hundreds of times, but he'd rarely had to use them. Tonight, he had a feeling that would change. The night air grew thick with tension as James stumbled closer, now just a few meters away. Andrew could see the red in his eyes and the sweat on his forehead. The young man's friend had stopped trying to intervene and instead stood frozen, watching in horror as James approached the restricted area. Through years of practice, Andrew kept his face completely expressionless, but his senses were on high alert. He could hear James's uneven footsteps on the pavement, smell the mixture of beer and whiskey on his breath, and see the unsteady way he held his phone. The other tourists had formed a loose semicircle, their phones recording what they probably thought would be just another funny video of a drunk tourist trying to make a guard laugh. But Andrew knew better. In his 3 years of service, he developed a sixth sense for trouble, and every instinct was telling him that this situation was about to become much more serious than a simple tourist prank. As James crossed the final warning line painted on the ground, Andrew prepared himself for what would happen next. His training had prepared him for this moment, but he hoped the drunk young man would come to his senses before things escalated further. The large warning sign next to the guard post was impossible to miss. Restricted area, do not cross. Yet James, in his drunken state, walked right past it as if it were just a simple suggestion. The crowd of tourists watching from behind the barriers grew larger, their phones recording every moment of what was about to become a massive mistake. This is going to be epic, James announced to his phone camera, his words slurring together. He was now live streaming on social media, convinced he was about to create the most viral guard video ever. The phone shook in his unsteady hands as he stepped even closer to Lance Corporal Wells. Mike, James's friend, had his face buried in his hands. He couldn't watch but couldn't walk away either. He's going to get himself killed, he muttered to a tourist standing next to him. The tourist, an American woman in her 50s, nodded in agreement while continuing to record the scene. The temperature had dropped, and a light fog was rolling in across the palace grounds, creating an eerie atmosphere around the guard post. The spotlights illuminating Buckingham Palace cast long shadows across the plaza, making Lance Corporal Wells's tall bearskin cap look even more imposing. James was now barely 2 meters from the guard, close enough that the light from his phone screen illuminated his face. "Hey, Mr. Guard," he called out, waving his free hand in front of Wells's face. "Do you ever get tired of standing like that? Must be boring, right?" Lance Corporal Wells did exactly what his training required. In a voice that boomed across the plaza, he shouted, Step back from the Queen's Guardi. The command was so sudden and loud that several tourists jumped, and James stumbled backward, nearly dropping his phone. But instead of taking the warning seriously, James found it hilarious. He turned to his phone camera and said, "Did you hear that?" He actually spoke. "Let's see if we can make him do it again." The alcohol had completely destroyed his ability to recognize danger, turning this serious situation into what he thought was a game. The two military police officers were now moving quickly across the plaza, but they were still 30 seconds away. A group of French tourists near the barrier started shouting at James in broken English, trying to warn him to step back. Even a group of pigeons that had been pecking at the ground nearby scattered, as if they could sense the tension in the air. James took another stumbling step forward, now entering the final warning zone. His phone was almost touching Lance Corporal Wells's chest as he tried to get the perfect angle for his video. "Come on, mate," he said, grinning at the guard. "Just one little smile for my followers. They're going to love this." The guard remained perfectly still, but his eyes were alert, tracking every movement. His right hand gripped his rifle slightly tighter, following the protocols he practiced countless times. The next step in the procedure would be a stamp of his foot, followed by turning to face the threat directly, but he hoped it wouldn't come to that. More tourists had gathered now, forming a semicircle around the scene. Some were still recording, but others had lowered their phones, realizing this was no longer entertainment but a serious security situation. A young child in the crowd asked her mother, "Why is that man being so silly?" But her mother quickly shushed her. Mike made one final desperate attempt to stop his friend. "James," he shouted, "that's enough. You're going to get arrested." But his words were lost in the general murmur of the crowd and the sound of James's continued commentary to his live stream audience. The cold night air was thick with tension as James swayed on his feet, now less than an arm's length from the guard. The light fog swirled around them, and the palace spotlights cast both their shadows long across the plaza. Lance Corporal Wells could smell the mixture of beer, whiskey, and poor judgment emanating from the drunk tourist. James raised his phone higher, trying to get a shot of himself next to the guard's famous bearskin cap. As he did so, he lost his balance slightly and reached out with his free hand to steady himself. That hand was now dangerously close to Lance Corporal Wells's rifle, and everyone in the crowd could see that this situation was about to take a very serious turn. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed by news channels, and used in police training videos as an example of what not to do at Buckingham Palace. In the fog-filled midnight air, James made the worst decision of his young life. "Hey everyone, watch this." James slurred into his phone camera, his live stream now having attracted hundreds of viewers. "I'm going to show you what these guards are really carrying." His alcohol-soaked brain had somehow convinced him that the rifle must be a prop, just another part of the guard's costume. The crowd gasped as James's free hand moved toward Lance Corporal Wells's SA-80 rifle. Time seemed to slow down. Several people shouted "no" at once. Mike, James's friend, turned away, unable to watch what he knew would happen next. A woman in the crowd covered her young son's eyes. The SA-80 rifle that Lance Corporal Wells carried wasn't a toy or a prop. It was a fully functional military weapon, the same type he had trained with during his years of service. While it wasn't loaded during guard duty, it was still a serious piece of military equipment, and any attempt to grab it was considered a serious security threat. James's fingers were just centimeters from the rifle's barrel. His livestream viewers were sending a flood of comments. "Oh, do it. This guy's crazy. Someone stop him. This is going to end badly." The two military police officers were running now, their boots echoing on the pavement, but they were still too far away to prevent what was about to happen. The palace's security cameras had already zoomed in on the scene, and inside the security office, officers were scrambling to respond. Lance Corporal Wells could feel the drunk tourist's fingers brush against his rifle. In his 3 years of service, no one had ever been foolish enough to actually try to touch his weapon. He had practiced this scenario countless times in training, but now it was happening for real. James's brain, swimming in alcohol, failed to process several important facts. 1. The Queen's Guard were real soldiers, not actors. 2. Their weapons were real, not props. 3. They were authorized to use force to protect their weapons. 4. What he was doing was a serious criminal offense. "Come on, let me just see it for a second," James said, his words barely understandable as his hand closed around the rifle's barrel. His phone was still recording, capturing every moment of his monumental mistake. The live stream had now attracted thousands of viewers, all watching in horror as the scene unfolded. The cold metal of the rifle barrel touched James's palm. In his drunken mind, this was going to be the moment that made him internet famous. He imagined the video going viral, people laughing at how he'd managed to mess with one of the famously stoic Queen's guards. The crowd had grown completely silent. The only sounds were the distant traffic, the flutter of pigeons' wings, and James's drunken mumbling to his livestream audience. Even the usual London night noises seemed to have paused, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Mike had finally found his voice again. "James, stop," he screamed, but it was too late. His friend's fingers had already wrapped around the rifle's barrel, and the next few seconds would change everything. Lance Corporal Wells remained perfectly still, following his training to the letter. He knew exactly what he would have to do next, and he knew it wouldn't be gentle. His muscles tensed imperceptibly under his red uniform as he prepared to respond to this threat exactly as he had been trained. The palace spotlights cast harsh shadows across the scene, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere. In the distance, Big Ben began to chime midnight, its deep bells providing an ominous soundtrack to what was about to become one of the most viewed videos of the year. James tugged slightly on the rifle barrel, his alcohol-addled brain still somehow expecting the guard to break character and laugh along with his prank. Instead, he was about to learn a very painful lesson about respecting the Queen's Guard, one that would involve a face-first meeting with the cold, hard pavement of Buckingham Palace. What happened in the next 3 seconds would later be analyzed frame by frame on news channels across the world. Lance Corporal Wells's response was a perfect example of military training in action, a demonstration of why you should never mess with the Queen's Guard. The moment James's fingers wrapped around the rifle barrel, Lance Corporal Wells sprang into action. His movement was so sudden and precise that many tourists' cameras caught only a blur of red uniform and black bearskin cap. In one smooth motion, he stepped backward, pulling his rifle away from James's grasp. "Make way toward the Queen's Guard." The command exploded across the plaza like a thunderclap, causing several tourists to jump. Lance Corporal Wells's voice, trained to carry across battlefields, echoed off the palace walls. It was no longer the voice of a tourist attraction. It was the voice of a soldier dealing with a threat. James's drunk brain took a full second to realize what was happening. His hand was now grabbing at empty air where the rifle had been, and his phone was still live-streaming everything. His confused expression quickly turned to shock as he saw the guard's face turn toward him, stern and professional, but with eyes that meant business. The 2 military police officers had finally reached the scene. They moved with the speed and precision of highly trained professionals. The first officer, Sergeant Sarah Thompson, grabbed James's right arm while her partner, Corporal Mark Jenkins, secured his left. James's phone clattered to the ground, still recording, but now showing only the feet of the gathering crowd. "What? Wait!" James protested as his face met the cold pavement. "I was just having a laugh." But neither the police officers nor Lance Corporal Wells were laughing. The officers had him properly restrained in less than 5 seconds, using standard police holds that were firm but not harmful. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Mike, James's friend, stood with his mouth open, unable to believe what he was seeing. A few tourists slowly lowered their phones, realizing they had just recorded something much more serious than the funny video they had expected. Lance Corporal Wells returned to his post, resuming his guard position as if nothing had happened. His movements were perfect, crisp, professional, and by the book. The only sign that anything had occurred was a small adjustment of his bearskin cap, which he made with military precision. James, now face down on the ground with his hands behind his back, was beginning to realize the seriousness of his situation. The alcohol in his system was still making it hard to think clearly, but even through his drunken haze, he could tell he had made a terrible mistake. "Sir, you are under arrest for attempting to interfere with a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces," Sergeant Thompson said clearly, making sure her voice was picked up by all the recording phones. She continued reading him his rights while Corporal Jenkins kept him secured. More police officers were arriving now, their blue lights flashing across the palace walls. The tourist crowd had grown even larger, with people pushing to get a better view of the scene. Parents were using the moment to teach their children about respecting authority, pointing out how quickly things had gone wrong for the drunk tourist. Someone in the crowd had picked up James's phone, which was still live streaming. The video had already gone viral, with viewers around the world watching the scene unfold in real time. Comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read them. Did he really think that was a good idea? Instant karma. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The entire incident, from James's attempt to grab the rifle to his arrest, had taken less than 30 seconds. But those seconds would change his life forever. As the police officers helped him to his feet, James caught a glimpse of Lance Corporal Wells, still standing perfectly still at his post, as if nothing had happened. The fog had started to thicken around Buckingham Palace, and Big Ben's midnight chimes were fading away. For Lance Corporal Wells, it was just another night on duty. For James, it was the beginning of a very long and painful lesson about respecting the Queen's Guard. The holding cell at Charing Cross Police Station wasn't how James had planned to spend his Saturday night. The small room, with its plain white walls and single narrow bed, gave him plenty of time to think about his actions. The effects of alcohol were wearing off, being replaced by a pounding headache and a sick feeling in his stomach that wasn't just from drinking. Outside the cell, his friend Mike sat in the waiting area, filling out witness statements. He had called Tom, the bachelor whose party they'd been celebrating, to explain why James wouldn't be joining them for tomorrow's planned activities. The conversation hadn't been pleasant. "He did, Waygate." Tom had shouted through the phone. "I'm getting married next week, and my best man tried to grab a guard's rifle." The rest of the bachelor party group was already sharing messages in their WhatsApp group, a mixture of disbelief and wordy jokes. By 3 a.m., James's viral moment had spread across the internet. News websites were already running stories with headlines like "Drunk Tourist Learns Hard Lesson from Queen's Guard" and "Palace Prankster Gets Instant Justice." His phone, now in a police evidence bag, was still receiving notifications from thousands of new social media followers, not that he would be able to check them anytime soon. Detective Inspector Sarah Moore sat at her desk, reviewing the incident reports. The case was straightforward. Dozens of videos from different angles showed exactly what had happened. She had already received calls from several news organizations wanting statements about the incident. "Read these charges carefully," she told James during his morning interview. The list was long. Attempting to interfere with a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Breach of protected site security. Drunk and disorderly conduct. Potential violation of royal security protocols. James sat in the interview room, wearing the same clothes from the night before, now wrinkled and smelling of stale beer. His usual confident smile was gone, replaced by a look of genuine fear as he realized how serious the situation was. "Do you understand how lucky you are?" Detective Moore asked him. If Lance Corporal Wells hadn't followed his training exactly, or if the military police hadn't reached you so quickly, this could have ended much worse. In another part of London, Lance Corporal Wells was giving his own statement at the military police headquarters. His report was clear and professional, just like his actions have been. "The subject attempted to grab my weapon," he stated simply. "I followed standard protocol for threat response." Back at the police station, James's parents had arrived from Bristol. His father, a retired schoolteacher, could barely look at him. His mother had been crying. They sat in Detective Moore's office, listening as she explained the legal process ahead. "Your son will appear before the magistrate on Monday," she explained. "Given the evidence and the public nature of the incident, I suggest you contact a lawyer immediately." The videos of the incident had now reached international news. American breakfast shows were playing the clips, Australian evening news was featuring it, and social media platforms were full of memes and reactions. James's face was becoming recognized worldwide, but not in the way he had hoped when he started his live stream. In the holding cell, James tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the guard's stern face and remembered the feeling of his cheek hitting the cold pavement. His head still hurt, but now it was more from shame than alcohol. Mike had left him a change of clothes and a note. "I tried to stop you, mate. Hope you're okay. Call me when you can." The friendship would survive, but it would take time to get past this incident. By Sunday morning, palace security officials were using the video in their briefings. "This is why we maintain strict protocols," the chief of security explained to his team. "The Queen's Guard are not tourist attractions. They are active duty soldiers protecting the royal family and properties." James's lawyer arrived late Sunday afternoon. She was direct and honest. The evidence is overwhelming. Multiple videos, eyewitness accounts, and her own live stream. We need to focus on damage control and showing genuine remorse. She spread several newspapers on the table, all featuring his story. The headlines made James sink deeper into his chair, finally understanding just how badly he had messed up. 3 months after the incident, James Morrison sat in his small apartment in Bristol, watching yet another YouTube video about his infamous night at Buckingham Palace. His face had become a meme, appearing in instant karma compilations and what not to do in London tourist guides. The video of his arrest had been viewed over 50 million times. The court case had ended 2 weeks ago. Thanks to his genuine remorse, clean record, and good lawyer, he had avoided jail time. Instead, he received a £5,000 fine, a suspended sentence, and 200 hours of community service. He also had to write formal apologies to Lance Corporal Wells and the palace security team. "I am truly sorry for my disrespectful and dangerous behavior," he had written in his apology letter. "I now understand that the Queen's Guard are not tourist attractions but highly trained soldiers performing an important duty." The letter had felt inadequate, but it was all he could offer. His community service involved cleaning public parks and helping at a local youth center. During his talks with teenagers, he often used his own story as a warning about alcohol and poor decisions. "One stupid moment can change your whole life," he would tell them, showing them the viral video of his arrest. The incident had changed James in many ways. He had stopped drinking completely and deleted most of his social media accounts. His old job at the office had let him go after the incident made news, but he had found new work at a warehouse where people didn't recognize him as much. Tom's wedding had gone ahead as planned, but James didn't attend as best man. He watched the celebration through photos shared by Mike, who still checked on him regularly. Their friendship had survived, but like everything else in James's life, it was different now. "You're lucky, you know," Mike told him during one of their meetups at a local cafe. "That guard could have really hurt you if he wanted to. They're trained soldiers, not street performers." James nodded, remembering how quickly and professionally Lance Corporal Wells had responded. The incident had led to changes at Buckingham Palace too. Security barriers were moved further back, and new signs were installed with clearer warnings about approaching the guards. Tourist guides now specifically mentioned James's case as an example of what not to do. Lance Corporal Wells had received a commendation for his perfect handling of the situation. Its response was being used in training videos for new guards, showing exactly how to handle tourist interference. He had been promoted to corporal and continued his duties at the palace, occasionally recognizing tourists who pointed at him and whispered, "That's the guard from the video." James's parents had eventually forgiven him, but his father still shook his head whenever the incident came up. "At least you learned something," he would say. "Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we remember best." The £5,000 fine had taken all of James's savings, but as his father said, the lesson was worth every penny. 1 year after the incident, James received an unexpected letter. It was from a London tourism board, asking if he would participate in their new public awareness campaign about respecting British institutions. At first, he thought about declining, not wanting to revisit the embarrassing incident. But then he realized it was a chance to turn his mistake into something positive. The campaign featured his story alongside other tourist do's and don'ts, with the tagline, "Respect the Tradition." James's face appeared on posters in London airports and train stations with a simple message: "The Queen's Guard are real soldiers. I learned this the hard way." Today, James still lives quietly in Bristol. He has a new girlfriend who accepts his past, and a steady job that keeps him busy. Sometimes, when he sees tourists taking photos with guards on TV, he feels a twinge of embarrassment, but mostly he's grateful. Grateful that his drunken mistake didn't end worse, grateful for the lessons he learned, and grateful for the chance to warn others. "Life goes on," he told a reporter during his only public interview. "But next time I'm in London, I think I'll admire the guards from a safe distance. Some traditions deserve respect, and some lessons only need to be learned once."